Nobody knew how the ancient predator species went extinct until a human child explained it in class. For centuries, everyone in the galaxy had wondered what happened to the ancient predator species. These creatures were enormous, strong, and intelligent. They ruled many planets long before humans even left Earth. Historians wrote long papers, scholars debated in conferences, and space travelers told stories about them, but no one knew for sure why they disappeared. Some said they were wiped out by a virus, others believed a powerful weapon ended them, and a few thought that some mysterious natural disaster destroyed their homes. All of these explanations were possible, but none fit perfectly. The galaxy had lost one of its most dangerous and fascinating species, and nobody could say why. On a quiet planet far from the center of the galaxy, there was a school where many young beings from different planets came to learn together. It was not a very big school, but it had students from many worlds. Some had 4 arms, some had scales, some had feathers, and some looked like humans. They all came to this school because it was one of the few places that taught galactic history properly. Most students liked history, but some found it boring. They preferred subjects like star navigation, technology, or zero-gravity sports. On this day, in one of the history classrooms, Mrs. Carter was teaching a lesson about the ancient predator species. She was an older human woman with gray hair tied neatly at the back. Her voice was calm, and she always tried to make history exciting. She liked asking questions and letting students think for themselves. The room smelled faintly of books and recycled air, a smell that made some students sleepy and some excited. The walls were covered with hollow frames showing images of planets, star systems, and old ruins. In one corner, there was a small model of an ancient predator ship, dark and sharp, hovering slowly in the air. It looked dangerous even though it had not moved in thousands of years. Students were sitting in their seats, some looking at the hollow frames, some chatting quietly, and some staring out the window at the blue star outside. Among them was a human child named Ethan. Ethan was small for his age, with messy brown hair and bright green eyes. He was not the strongest student, nor the fastest, but he had a curiosity that was unusual for someone so young. He liked asking questions that other students never thought about, and he loved puzzles and mysteries. History fascinated him, not because it was old, but because it told stories of how life worked, how civilizations rose and fell, and why some things lasted while others disappeared. Mrs. Carter began the lesson by showing a map of the predator species, home systems. These planets, she said, pointing to glowing dots on the map, were once ruled by one of the most dangerous species in the galaxy. They could have conquered many others if they wanted. Yet somehow they are gone, gone without a clear reason. Many ideas have been suggested, but no one knows for sure. A student with blue scales on her arms named Lyra raised her claw. Maybe a superweapon destroyed them, she said. Her voice had a clicking sound at the end, typical of her species. I read about a weapon that could vaporize a planet in seconds. Mrs. Carter nodded. That is one theory, Lyra. It is possible, but no record of such a weapon has ever been found. And remember, many of the predator planets were destroyed slowly over hundreds of years. A single weapon would not explain that. A tall, thin alien named Jorik with long, flexible limbs leaned forward. Maybe they all got sick from a virus, he said. There are diseases that can wipe out entire populations. Another good theory, said Mrs. Carter. But again, there is no evidence. We have examined fossils, ruins, and even ancient predator technology. Nothing points to a virus. It is a mystery that has puzzled scholars for generations. Most of the students nodded, some bored, some thoughtful. They had heard these discussions before, and for them, it was just another lesson. But Ethan kept looking at the model ship, thinking about the predator species. He wondered what it meant to be so powerful, so dominant, and yet vanish completely. He asked himself, could anything survive if it became too strong? Could power itself be a weakness? Mrs. Carter then asked the class, "Does anyone have a different idea? Something new?" She looked around, her eyes stopping on each student for a moment. Some students shifted uncomfortably. They did not like to guess when the teacher expected a real answer. Others whispered to each other, trying to come up with something impressive. The room was quiet for a few seconds. Then Ethan raised his hand. All heads turned. Humans were rare in this school, and young humans even rarer. Most students expected a human child to give a small, unimportant answer. They expected nothing surprising. Ethan's hand was small, his voice soft. Yet when he spoke, it caught everyone's attention. "I think," Ethan began, "maybe they destroyed themselves." His voice was steady, not because of weapons or disease, but because of what they did to their world. Mrs. Carter smiled slightly. "That is an interesting idea, Ethan. Can you explain more?" Ethan nodded. He took a deep breath and looked at the images on the hollow frame again. The predator species were always shown hunting, fighting, and ruling. "They were perfect hunters," he said. "Everywhere they went, they hunted everything that could be hunted. They fought their rivals, they conquered planets, and they destroyed anyone who threatened them. But what happens if you hunt too much, or fight too much? I think they left nothing alive on many planets. No animals, no plants, maybe even no water. When everything is gone, even the strongest species cannot survive." The room went silent. Lyra's jaw clicked in surprise, and Jorik leaned back, clearly thinking. No one had said something like this before. It was simple, almost too simple, but it made sense. Mrs. Carter leaned on her desk, her eyes thoughtful. "That is a very human way to look at history," she said. "You are looking at balance, at cause and effect, not just battles and power. Can you think of examples from your own world that prove this?" Ethan smiled slightly. "On Earth," he said, "humans have done bad things to the planet. We cut forests, we pollute, and sometimes we overfish. When we go too far, we run out of resources. Predators can do the same thing. If they take too much, they have nothing left." "Maybe that is what happened to the predators." Mrs. Carter nodded. "So, you are saying that the predators were victims of their own strength?" "Yes," Ethan said. "They were too good at being predators. They did not stop, and in the end, there was nothing left for them to survive on." The alien students were quiet. For them, this idea was strange. Many species in the galaxy believed that strength always meant survival. No one wanted to think that power could destroy itself. But as they looked at the images of ruined planets and broken cities, Ethan's words began to make sense. The predators had been too successful. They had hunted everything and everyone until their own civilization could not last. Mrs. Carter smiled and said, "Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one. History is not always about wars and weapons. Sometimes it is about choices, balance, and understanding the limits of life." Even though the lesson was almost over, the students could not stop thinking. Ethan's classmates, humans, aliens, and hybrids, looked at each other differently now. They had always believed that studying ancient history was about memorizing dates and battles. Now they realized it was about learning life itself. After class, Lyra came to Ethan. "Your idea, it makes sense," she said. "We always thought they died because something hit them, not because of themselves. It is strange to think that hunting too much could kill even the strongest species." "I just thought about it," Ethan replied. "Sometimes the simplest thing is the answer. We do not always need a secret weapon or magic power. We just need to pay attention to what happens when you take too much." Jorik joined them, nodding slowly. "Your idea will make scholars rethink everything," he said. Even Mrs. Carter looked surprised. Humans can be small, but sometimes small minds see big truths. The three of them walked out into the sunlight that filtered through the dome of the school. The blue star outside warmed their faces, and for a moment the galaxy felt smaller, more understandable. Ethan did not think about fame or being praised. He only thought about understanding, about learning why things happen, and maybe about helping others avoid the mistakes of the past. As the day ended, Mrs. Carter watched the students leave. She knew something important had happened in her classroom today. History was alive again, not just dates and battles, but lessons that could help shape the future. She smiled quietly, thinking that maybe humans, small as they were, had something unique to teach the galaxy. How to survive not just with strength, but with wisdom. And somewhere, in the dusty ruins of the ancient predator worlds, the truth of Ethan's words echoed silently through time. Even the mightiest could fall if they did not understand balance, and even the smallest mind could reveal the greatest secrets. After the lesson about the ancient predators, Ethan could not stop thinking. He kept looking at the images of destroyed planets and the models of predator ships. Something about the story did not feel complete. He knew that understanding the past could help everyone in the galaxy avoid repeating mistakes. But he also wondered if anyone else could see what he saw. The next day, the students gathered in the school's library. It was a large room filled with glowing books, hollow frames, and quiet reading spaces. Students from many planets sat together, reading, studying, or quietly discussing history. Ethan sat at a table near the window, looking out at the small moons orbiting the planet. He was thinking about the predator species. Their strength, their intelligence, and yet their disappearance. He tried to imagine what it must have been like to live among them, to see their cities, their technology, and their hunting grounds. Lyra came over and sat beside him, holding a small book filled with old predator sketches. "I could not stop thinking about what you said in class," she said. "It is strange. All my life, I thought only weapons or wars could destroy a species. But maybe it really was their own choices." Ethan nodded. "Sometimes it is not one big event that ends a species," he said. "It is the little things. Too much hunting, too much fighting, too little thinking about the future. Over time, it adds up. If they did not stop, they would destroy themselves slowly." Jorik joined them, carrying a tablet that displayed ancient predator star maps. "I checked some of the old records," he said. "Not many survived, but the ones that did show something interesting. The predators moved from planet to planet, and their cities became emptier each time. They conquered everything, but they did not rebuild or care for what they destroyed. Maybe that is what you meant, Ethan. They had no balance." "Yes," Ethan said. "Balance is everything. If you take more than you need, eventually you have nothing left. And that is what happened to them. They were too good at what they did, and that destroyed them." Lyra's eyes were wide. "So you are saying that the galaxy's most powerful species could fall just because of how they lived?" "Exactly," Ethan said. "They were not stopped by enemies, they were stopped by themselves. Power is not enough if you do not understand limits." The three of them spent the next few hours reading every piece of information they could find about the ancient predators. They studied ruins, old records, and reports from explorers who had visited abandoned planets. Ethan noticed patterns. On every planet the predators lived, the local wildlife disappeared first. Then the smaller predator species vanished. Finally, cities became empty, machines stopped working, and even the largest predator settlements crumbled. It was not a sudden event, it was slow, methodical, and inevitable. "It is like they ate themselves," Lyra said quietly. "Not food, but everything that gave them life." "Yes," Ethan said, "and that is why no weapon or disease story fits. Nothing could kill them fast enough." "They killed themselves by taking too much," Jorik frowned. "It is strange to think that being too strong could be dangerous. My species believes that strength always brings safety. We never learned that balance could be more important than power." Ethan smiled. "It is hard to understand at first. Strength is important, but only if you know how to use it. Without thinking, even the strongest can fail." They continued their research for days. Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik worked together, collecting data and comparing notes. They discovered that the predator species' greatest mistake was not a single battle or weapon. It was their way of life. They believed they were the best hunters in the galaxy, and because of that, they never stopped. They took too much, destroyed ecosystems, and eventually lost the very resources that supported their civilization. One afternoon, Ethan suggested a simple experiment. He asked Lyra and Jorik to imagine a small planet filled with animals, plants, and predators. Then he asked them to think about what would happen if the strongest predators ate everything they wanted without stopping. Slowly, the planet would become empty. The predators would have nothing to eat, nothing to hunt, and nothing to protect. Eventually, they would weaken, their numbers would drop, and their cities would fail. It was a simple exercise, but it helped the alien students understand Ethan's idea. "It makes sense now," Lyra said. "The predators were victims of their own success. They had nothing left to survive on. And humans are different," Ethan said. "We make mistakes, but we also learn from them. We rebuild, we cooperate, and we plan for the future. That is why we survive, even when we are weak or small." Jorik looked thoughtful. "Maybe that is why your species is so unusual. You are not the strongest, but you survive. Maybe even more than that, you teach lessons the galaxy needs." Ethan blushed slightly. He was not used to praise, but he did not mind. He only wanted to understand, to see patterns, and to learn why life worked the way it did. As they continued their studies, the other students began to notice their work. Some were curious, some skeptical, and some quietly impressed. Even Mrs. Carter came to observe them. She watched as Ethan explained his ideas, using simple examples and comparisons from Earth. She smiled quietly. His understanding was remarkable, especially for someone so young. He was not just repeating information from books. He was thinking, questioning, and creating connections that others had missed for centuries. One evening, Ethan stayed late in the library, reading a report about predator technology. He noticed how their cities were designed for hunting and control, not for living or growing. Machines were built to capture prey, not to make life better. Buildings were tall and sharp, like weapons themselves. The more he studied, the more he realized that the predator species had never considered sustainability. They only considered power and dominance. They destroyed everything, he whispered to himself, even their own chance to survive. The next morning, Ethan shared his findings with Lyra and Jorik. They were amazed. The predator's downfall was not just about hunting too much. It was about how they thought. Their philosophy, their culture, and their priorities all led to extinction. No weapon, no disease, no natural disaster could have done what their own choices did. "It is almost sad," Lyra said. "They were so strong, but they could not see the future." "Yes," Ethan said, "and that is why humans can teach the galaxy something important. We make mistakes, but we also learn. We try to survive not by killing everything, but by thinking, planning, and helping each other. That is why we have a chance." As the day ended, the three friends walked through the quiet halls of the school. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting shadows on the floors. They did not talk much, each lost in thought. The galaxy was big, dangerous, and full of mysteries. But for the first time, Ethan felt that some of the mysteries could be solved, even the ones that had puzzled scholars for centuries. Over the next week, Ethan and his friends presented their ideas in small discussions with other students. Some laughed, some argued, but slowly, more students began to see the point. The predator's extinction was not caused by an outside force, it was caused by their own choices. The galaxy had always assumed that the strongest species could not fail, but now, young minds were learning a different lesson. Even the most powerful could fall if they ignored balance, cooperation, and foresight. Mrs. Carter watched these discussions quietly. She realized that history was alive again in her classroom. Students were not just memorizing facts, they were thinking, questioning, and applying lessons to the present. And she knew that Ethan, small as he was, had changed the way her students understood the galaxy. By the end of the week, the three friends returned to the ruins of an old predator settlement in a virtual simulation room. The simulation showed the planet as it once was, filled with cities, wildlife, and predators. As the simulation ran, they watched the animals disappear, the cities empty, and the predators weaken. It was a slow, clear lesson in cause and effect. "Look," Ethan said, pointing to the screen, "it is not sudden, it is slow." They had everything, but they could not stop taking more than they needed. Slowly, it destroyed them. Lyra nodded. "It is frightening. A species so strong could vanish so quietly." "And that is why humans survive," Ethan said. "We do not have the same strength. We are small, weak, and fragile in many ways, but we can learn. We can cooperate. We can recover. That is why we still exist." Jorik looked at him and smiled. "Maybe your species is the galaxy's real lesson, Ethan. Not power, not weapons, but balance, thinking, and cooperation." As they left the simulation room, the sun of the distant star reflected on the polished floors. The galaxy was vast and full of danger, but for the first time, Ethan felt that understanding, wisdom, and foresight could make a real difference. The predators had vanished, but their story had taught an unforgettable lesson. Even the mightiest could fail if they ignored the simplest truths. And for Ethan, a human child in a small school far from the center of the galaxy, that lesson was just the beginning. After their research in the library and the simulation room, Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik became known among the students for asking new questions about the ancient predator species. Some students laughed at their ideas at first, thinking a human child could not understand what scholars had debated for centuries. But over time, more students began listening. Ethan's simple way of explaining complicated problems made sense even to aliens who had never considered thinking in that way. One morning, Mrs. Carter called Ethan to the front of the classroom. She wanted him to share his thoughts with the entire grade. Ethan's heart beat faster. He was not afraid of speaking, but he knew this was a big opportunity. He looked around at the alien faces, some skeptical, some curious, and some genuinely excited. "Today, Mrs. Carter said, we have a student who has thought deeply about a question that has puzzled scholars for hundreds of years. Ethan, would you share your ideas about why the ancient predator species went extinct?" Ethan stood up slowly. He carried his notes and sketches, but he did not need them. He had practiced explaining his thoughts in simple words. "I think the predators did not go extinct because of weapons, war, or disease," he began. His voice was steady, calm, and confident. "They went extinct because they were too successful at what they did. They hunted everything, conquered every rival, and destroyed the systems that supported their lives. Over time, this left them with nothing to survive on." A student named Rena, with green scales covering her arms, clicked her teeth softly, a sound her species made when confused. "Are you saying that being too strong is dangerous?" she asked. "How can power destroy a species?" Ethan nodded. "Power is only useful if you use it wisely. The predators were powerful, but they never stopped to think about balance. They only thought about winning, hunting, and taking more. When there is nothing left, even the strongest cannot survive." The classroom was quiet. Alien students exchanged glances, whispering softly to each other. Some seemed shocked, as if no one had ever thought of strength being a weakness. Mrs. Carter watched silently, smiling. Ethan's simple words had a clarity that even she found remarkable. "Can you give examples?" asked a tall alien named Morik with long arms and dark eyes. "It sounds reasonable, but I want proof." Ethan nodded. He tapped the hollow frame on the wall, which showed images of predator cities. "Look at these worlds," he said. On every planet, the predators hunted animals until none were left. Smaller predators disappeared first, then the larger ones. Plants died because there were too many predators and too few prey to keep the ecosystem alive. Cities were abandoned, machines stopped working, and their population began to drop. It did not happen in one day. It happened slowly over hundreds of years. They destroyed everything that gave life to their civilization. Jorik added, and the records we have confirm it. Every planet we studied shows the same pattern. The predators moved from world to world, taking everything, leaving nothing. It is not a weapon, not a virus. It is their own actions. Rena shook her head slowly. I never thought about it that way. We always believe that the strongest survive, but maybe that is not true. Maybe the way you live matters more than your strength. Exactly, Ethan said. Even humans know that. We are not the strongest species in the galaxy. We are small, fragile, and weak compared to many others, but we survive because we cooperate, plan, and think about the future. That is something the predators never learned. The class spent the rest of the lesson discussing Ethan's ideas. For many students, it was a new way of thinking. The predators had always been a symbol of power, strength, and fear. Now they were also a warning, a lesson about what happens when a species ignores balance. After class, Lyra, Jorik, and Ethan walked to the simulation room again. They wanted to see if they could understand more about the predators' way of thinking. The simulation recreated a predator world in its prime. Cities stretched high, hunting machines roamed, and predators moved through streets with confidence. It was a world of perfect dominance, but there was something missing. Look at the way they build, Ethan said, pointing to the tall towers. Everything is sharp, dangerous, designed for hunting. Nothing here is for comfort, growth, or balance. They only care about power. Lyra frowned. It is beautiful, but it feels empty. Even when they had everything, it seems like nothing could last. Jorik nodded. And that is their mistake. They did not plan for the future. They thought strength alone would protect them. Ethan smiled softly. Sometimes being too strong is dangerous because it makes you forget the simple rules of life. Survival is not just power. It is balance, cooperation, thinking ahead. Over the next several days, Ethan and his friends went deeper into the records. They examined predator battle reports, city plans, and hunting logs. They found that the predators often fought each other, even when they did not need to. They destroyed rival groups and took their resources, thinking it would make them stronger. But each conflict weakened the overall species. Resources were used faster than they could regenerate, and over time, populations shrank. Every decision they made was about winning now, Ethan said one evening, sitting with his friends in the library. They did not care about tomorrow, and that is why they failed. Power without planning is fragile. Strength without balance is dangerous. Lyra looked thoughtful. So humans are different because we think about tomorrow, we plan, we cooperate, and we rebuild after mistakes. Yes, Ethan said, and that is why we survive. We are not perfect, but we learn. That is something the predators never did. Jorik added, it is almost like the galaxy needs humans, not because we are the strongest, but because we can teach lessons. Our survival shows that thinking matters more than just strength. Their discussions drew more attention. Other students began asking questions, wanting to understand the predators in the same way. Even the teachers started to pay attention. Ethan's simple approach, looking at cause and effect, thinking about life, and understanding balance, was changing the way history was studied at the school. One afternoon, Mrs. Carter brought the class together for a special session. We have learned a lot about the predators from ancient records, she said. But today, I want you to think about what these lessons mean for us. Why does it matter that a species failed because of its own choices? Ethan stood up. It matters because the same rules apply to all species, he said. If we do not think about balance, cooperation, and the future, even the strongest species can fail. The predators show what happens when a civilization ignores these things. We can learn from their mistakes. Lyra added, it also teaches us that power alone is not enough. You can be the strongest hunter, the fastest fighter, or the smartest leader, but if you do not think about what you take, what you destroy, and what you leave behind, it will not last. Jorik nodded. It is a warning. Even the mightiest species can fall if they are careless. Humans survive not because we are the strongest, but because we understand balance. That is a lesson the galaxy needs to remember. Mrs. Carter smiled. Well said. History is not just about the past. It is about learning for the future. Today, we see that even a child can teach important lessons. After the session, the students left quietly, thinking about what they had heard. Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik stayed behind in the library, continuing to study predator records. They wanted to understand every detail, every choice that had led to the extinction of such a powerful species. Look at this, Ethan said, showing a map of predator colonies. Each world shows the same pattern. They expand, they hunt, they conquer, and eventually everything dies. It is like a chain reaction. One bad choice leads to another, and in the end, nothing survives. Lyra nodded. It is frightening. The galaxy always assumed strength meant safety. Now we see that it is not true. Even the most powerful can fail if they do not understand life. And that is why humans are special, Ethan said. We are not the strongest, but we can survive. We can learn. We can recover. That is why we are still here. Jorik smiled. Maybe one day, the galaxy will see humans as teachers, not threats. Our survival shows what really matters: thinking, planning, and balance. Over the following weeks, the story of the predators and Ethan's explanation spread throughout the school. Students from other classes came to listen, to ask questions, and to discuss. Even teachers from other departments joined in, intrigued by the new perspective. Ethan did not seek attention, but he realized that a simple child's question had started a conversation that could change how the galaxy understood history. And as he sat quietly one evening, looking at the stars outside the library window, Ethan thought about the predators one last time. They had been strong, smart, and dangerous. Yet all it took was a lack of balance, a failure to plan, and the result was extinction. Humans, fragile and small, could survive because they learned, cooperated, and thought about the future. The galaxy was vast, full of powerful species and endless mysteries. But Ethan knew one thing clearly: strength alone was not enough to survive. Wisdom, understanding, and balance mattered more than all the weapons and armies in the universe. And for him, that knowledge was just the beginning. After weeks of studying the ancient predators, Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik became more curious than ever. They wanted to know not only what happened, but why the predators made the choices they did. It was one thing to see the results of their actions. It was another to understand the thought behind them. The three friends decided to explore deeper records stored in the oldest part of the school library. The ancient archives were dusty, dimly lit, and filled with fragile hollow records and writings from explorers who had visited predator ruins long ago. "I feel like we are walking into history itself," Lyra whispered as they entered the archive. The walls were lined with shelves taller than any of them, packed with boxes, scrolls, and old data drives. The air smelled of metal and old paper, a mix that was strange but comforting to those who loved history. "Be careful," Ethan said, adjusting his small backpack. "These records are fragile and some of them might be incomplete. We have to pay attention to every detail." Jorik stretched his arms and floated slightly above the floor. "We have seen a lot in simulations and records, but maybe the old explorers saw things we cannot see in data. Let's find their notes." They spent hours going through the archives. Ethan found reports from alien scholars who had studied predator ruins centuries ago. The reports were short, often cryptic, but they hinted at something more. Predators not only destroyed life around them, they ignored the basic rules of balance and cooperation. Their cities were designed for hunting and dominance, not for survival or community. Machines that could have helped their civilization were instead used for war and capturing prey. Even when resources became scarce, the predators refused to change their habits. "Look at this," Ethan said, holding up a hollow record. "It says that predators could have adapted. They had knowledge, technology, and skill, but they were too focused on conquering and controlling. They did not care about tomorrow, only today. Everything we have seen before, empty worlds, dead cities, vanished species, comes from that choice. Lyra nodded slowly. So they destroyed themselves not because they were weak, but because they were proud and stubborn. They thought power was enough. And that is dangerous, Ethan said, because the galaxy assumed that the strongest species would never fail. The predators prove that it is not true. Strength alone cannot save you if you ignore the future. Jorik looked thoughtful. Humans survive because you think about tomorrow. You plan, cooperate, and recover. Even when we see humans as small or fragile, you survive where others fail. They continued through the archives, discovering more disturbing facts. Some predator worlds had been abandoned not by attack, but by starvation. Animals, plants, and prey species had disappeared. Predators were forced to fight among themselves for the remaining resources. Cities crumbled slowly because machines broke down and no one repaired them. Even with all their strength, the predators could not survive the consequences of their own actions. It is frightening, Lyra said, to think that even the strongest can vanish quietly without a war, without a disease, just because of how they lived. And that is why humans are special, Ethan said. We are not the strongest. We can be small, weak, and vulnerable, but we learn from mistakes. We rebuild. We cooperate. We survive because we plan, not just because we fight. As the day passed, Ethan noticed something strange in one of the records. It described a predator elder observing a dying planet. Instead of adapting, the elder seemed proud of the destruction. It was as if the predator species had a philosophy that valued power and dominance above life itself. Ethan felt a chill run through him. Even when a species is intelligent and strong, pride and stubbornness can be fatal. They were too proud to survive, Ethan said quietly. Even with all their intelligence and technology, they could not change. Jorik shook his head. It is almost sad. They could have survived, but they chose not to. The galaxy lost a great species because of choices, not because of accidents. It is a warning, Ethan said. For all species, not just predators. If you ignore balance and cooperation, even strength cannot save you. That night, Ethan had trouble sleeping. He kept thinking about the predators, their strength, and their choices. He wondered how many other species in the galaxy were repeating the same mistakes without realizing it. He imagined worlds filled with powerful creatures, acting carelessly and slowly destroying themselves. The thought made him both anxious and determined. Humans might be small, but they had a chance to survive if they kept learning and planning. The next day, Ethan shared his thoughts with Lyra and Jorik. "I think we should present these records to the entire school," he said. "Not just the simulations, but the real records. Students need to understand how a species can fail, even when it seems unstoppable." Lyra nodded. "It will make a big impact. Seeing the real evidence will make them understand, not just guess." Jorik smiled. "And it will show that humans, even children, can teach the galaxy important lessons. Survival is not about strength alone, it is about balance and wisdom." They spent the next few days preparing a presentation. Ethan carefully organized the records, simulations, and examples from predator worlds. Lyra helped translate alien terms into simpler language that all students could understand. Jorik worked on the hollow projections to show the rise and fall of predator civilizations visually. When they finished, the presentation was clear, simple, and powerful. It showed not only the history of the predators, but also the lessons that any species could learn from their choices. On the day of the presentation, the entire school gathered in the main hall. Students, teachers, and even some visiting scholars attended. Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik stood in front of the audience. Ethan began quietly, but as he spoke, his confidence grew. "For centuries, the galaxy has wondered why the ancient predators went extinct," he said. "Many ideas have been suggested: war, disease, weapons. but none explain everything. Today, we want to show you something different. We want to show you why a species can fail because of its own choices. The hollow projection displayed predator worlds at their peak. Towering cities, hunting machines, and powerful predators filled the screens. The audience watched silently, impressed by the scale and power of the species. Ethan continued, explaining how predators destroyed prey, how ecosystems collapsed, and how their cities became empty. He used simple language, showing cause and effect clearly. "Look here," Ethan said, pointing to a projection of a predator city slowly collapsing. Machines break down, food disappears, predators fight each other. This did not happen in one day. It happened over hundreds of years. Their own actions destroyed them. No weapon, no disease, no attack from another species could have done this. They destroyed themselves. The audience was silent. Even the teachers looked thoughtful. Ethan spoke with clarity, explaining balance, cooperation, and planning. He compared the predators to humans, showing that humans survived not because of strength, but because of learning, cooperation, and careful thinking. Lyra added details about predator philosophy and culture, showing how pride and stubbornness prevented adaptation. Jorik demonstrated with simulations how predator worlds changed over time, from thriving to empty and lifeless. The evidence was clear, simple, and undeniable. After the presentation, students began asking questions. "Could humans make the same mistakes?" asked a small alien with green feathers. "Yes," Ethan said. "Any species can. Strength alone does not protect you. We survive because we plan, cooperate, and learn. If we forget that, we can fail too." "Does that mean the galaxy is lucky humans exist?" asked another student. "I think so," Ethan replied. "We are small, but we survive, and we can teach lessons. Balance, cooperation, thinking about the future, these are stronger than weapons or armies. The predators show what happens when a species ignores them." Mrs. Carter watched silently, proud and amazed. She had taught for decades, but never had she seen a student explain history so clearly, so simply, and so powerfully. Ethan's presentation was not about showing how strong humans were, but about showing how humans survived, learned, and could teach the galaxy valuable lessons. Over the next few days, discussions continued. Students talked in the halls, in the library, and in their dorms. They debated, asked questions, and thought about balance, cooperation, and planning. Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik had started something bigger than themselves. They had reminded the galaxy that survival was not about strength alone. One evening, as Ethan walked back to his room, he looked at the stars and thought about the predators. They had been powerful, intelligent, and dangerous. Yet all it took was ignoring balance and refusing to adapt to bring their species to extinction. Ethan felt a deep respect for them, but also a determination to make sure humans never made the same mistakes. "They are gone," he whispered, "but their story is not wasted. We can learn from them. We can survive where they failed. We must survive not just for humans, but for the galaxy." And in that quiet moment, Ethan realized something important. Humans were not the strongest, fastest, or most powerful species. But they were capable of something greater: understanding, learning, and choosing wisely. The galaxy was vast, dangerous, and unpredictable. But if humans remembered the lessons of the predators, they had a chance to thrive, survive, and even teach other species how to do the same. After their presentation on the ancient predators, Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik noticed a change in the school. Students were talking more about balance, cooperation, and planning. Even students who had once ignored history were now asking questions, curious about the choices that could make or break a civilization. The story of the predators was no longer just about the past, it had become a lesson for the future. One morning, Mrs. Carter called Ethan to her office. The room smelled faintly of old books, and the sunlight fell softly across the floor. She smiled warmly. "Ethan, I want you to know how proud I am," she said. You have reminded everyone here why history matters. It is not just dates and battles. It is understanding life, choices, and consequences. Ethan looked down at his hands. I just wanted to understand, he said softly. I did not expect everyone to listen. Mrs. Carter shook her head. Sometimes the smallest voice can have the biggest impact. You have shown that thinking and learning are stronger than brute strength. That is a lesson the galaxy needs. After leaving her office, Ethan met Lyra and Jorik in the library. They decided to visit the simulation room one last time to review Predator worlds. The holograms showed cities once filled with life, hunting machines roaming streets, and predators moving with confidence. Then the simulation progressed, showing the slow collapse of entire planets. Animals disappeared first, then the predators themselves until nothing remained but empty ruins. It is hard to imagine, Lyra said, watching the simulation. They had everything and yet they failed because they did not think about tomorrow. Yes, Ethan said. They were strong, but they ignored balance. They ignored cooperation. They ignored planning. Strength alone cannot save a species if it refuses to learn from its mistakes. Jorik nodded. And that is why humans survive. We are not the strongest, but we are careful, thoughtful, and willing to change. That is our power. After the simulation, Ethan and his friends walked outside. The sun of the distant star reflected on the quiet campus, and the air felt warm and alive. Ethan thought about the galaxy, the predators, and humans. He realized that survival was not just about technology, weapons, or speed. It was about understanding, learning, and making wise choices. Humans might be small, but they had something other species often lacked: the ability to think, adapt, and cooperate. Over the following weeks, the lessons from the predators spread beyond the school. Students shared their understanding with friends, families, and other schools. Scholars began rethinking old assumptions about strength, power, and survival. Humans, once considered weak or fragile by many species, were now seen in a new light. They were a reminder that intelligence, planning, and cooperation could be more important than raw strength. One day, Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik were invited to a council meeting at the school. Teachers, visiting scholars, and student representatives from different planets attended. The council discussed how the lessons of the predators could help all species avoid similar mistakes. Ethan spoke quietly, clearly, and simply. The predators were strong, smart, and dangerous, he said, but they failed because they ignored balance. They ignored cooperation. They ignored the future. Any species can make the same mistake. Humans survive because we learn from our mistakes, we cooperate, and we plan. That is something the galaxy should remember. The council members listened carefully. One elder scholar, a creature with blue scales and large eyes, said, "Your words are simple, yet powerful. The galaxy has long assumed that the strongest species cannot fail. Your example shows that wisdom, balance, and cooperation are stronger than strength alone." "We hope that other species will see this," Ethan said. "Strength is useful, but only if it is guided by thought, planning, and care for the future. The predators were a warning, and humans are proof that survival is about more than power." After the council, the three friends walked outside. The stars stretched across the sky, endless and bright. Ethan looked at the distant planets, thinking about the choices every species made. Some would follow the predator's path and fail. Some would learn and survive. Humans, small as they were, had already learned the lesson and were ready to share it. "Do you think other species will understand?" Lyra asked. "Some will," Ethan said. "Some will ignore it, but the truth is simple. Balance, cooperation, and planning matter more than strength. Those who listen can survive. Those who do not will vanish." Jorik smiled. "Humans are small, but you teach big lessons. Maybe the galaxy needs humans not for strength but for wisdom." As the months passed, the story of the predators became a central lesson in the school. Students learned not only the history of the species, but also the philosophy behind survival. Ethan's simple explanation, that the predators failed because they were too strong to see their limits, was repeated in classrooms, study groups, and simulations across many worlds. Humans, once underestimated, were now seen as examples of how careful thinking and cooperation could save a species from extinction. One day, as Ethan walked through the campus gardens, he noticed small creatures from different planets moving among the plants. The gardens were carefully maintained, showing cooperation between species and humans. Ethan realized that life was not about taking everything or winning every battle. It was about understanding relationships, thinking ahead, and making choices that lasted. "This is what we learned from the predators," Ethan said softly to himself. "Strength alone is not enough. Wisdom, cooperation, and planning are what keep life alive." Later, Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik visited the library one last time. They walked past the old archives where predator records were stored. Ethan paused, looking at the fragile documents. He felt respect for the species. They had been powerful, smart, and dangerous. Yet their story ended quietly, without war or attack. Their failure was a result of choices, pride, and stubbornness. "They could have survived," Ethan whispered, "but they chose not to, and now their story teaches us." Lyra nodded. "It is a warning for all species, and for humans it is a lesson to keep learning and thinking." "Yes," Ethan said, "we survive not because we are strong, but because we learn, cooperate, and plan. That is our strength. That is why humans have a chance where others fail." As the sun set over the distant mountains of the campus, Ethan felt a sense of calm and purpose. The galaxy was full of mysteries, dangers, and powerful species. But humans had something unique. They had curiosity, intelligence, and the ability to learn. They had the chance to survive, not through strength, but through wisdom. And as he looked at the stars, Ethan knew one important truth. The predators were gone, but their story was not wasted. It would live on as a warning. Humans, small and fragile, could survive, thrive, and even teach the galaxy what really mattered. Balance, cooperation, and careful thinking were stronger than any weapon or army. He smiled, thinking of the future. The galaxy was vast, but humans had a chance. They could survive, grow, and help others learn. They were small, but they could change everything. The predators were gone, but the lesson remained. Ethan, Lyra, and Jorik walked together under the stars, knowing that their work had just begun. The galaxy was watching, learning, and listening. And for the first time, humans were no longer just a small species. They were a reminder of what truly mattered. Not power, not fear, not strength, but wisdom, cooperation, and the ability to think for tomorrow. The predators had vanished, leaving only ruins. Humans were alive, fragile, and small. Yet in that survival there was hope. And hope, Ethan knew, could change the galaxy. And with that, Ethan realized something even greater. The story of the predators was not just a lesson about the past. It was a guide for the future. If humans remembered, learned, and taught, the galaxy would be stronger, safer, and wiser. Humans had a chance, and now, so could others. The stars above were endless, and the galaxy was full of possibilities. But the choice was clear. Survival was not about strength. It was about balance, thought, and cooperation. And humans, small as they were, could show the way.